So welcome to our Least Restrictive Environment case study webinar focused on early childhood. My name is Tanya May, and I'm the OSPI Director of Special Education. And I'm joined today by a few of my colleagues. So we'll start with some introductions, and we'll begin with Ryan.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ryan Guzman, and I'm with you, obviously, from OSPI. I'm the 619 coordinator for our agency.
Thanks, Ryan, and welcome. And then Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca Lynn. Sorry, I introduced myself earlier. And I'm with OSPI. I'm Program Improvement Supervisor.
Great, thank you. For those of you who are joining us for the first time in this series today, welcome. For those of you who attended one or both of our previous webinars, welcome back. Some of today may feel a little bit familiar. We also want to just send out a huge thank you to our AESD partners, specifically North Central ESD 171 and Executive Director Darcy Johnson, who's been hosting our first couple of webinars. And today we are joined by Aaron Stewart from Puget Sound ESD. So we're just really grateful for that ongoing partnership. This webinar series has been focused on an overview and a deeper dive into the case studies from our LRE Case Studies resource. The document is linked on the bottom of this slide, and in response to questions we have been receiving about LRE across reopening models, we have posted an update to this resource, and it includes today's early childhood case study that we're going to walk through together. And we've also added a collection of frequently asked questions. So those are placed in the appendix at the bottom of the document. We really are going to do our best to address questions along the way today as time allows. So please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A at any time. The learning objectives for this webinar series have been focused on knowing when an IEP or IEP amendment is necessary, and sometimes when an amendment may not be necessary. Also reviewing strategies for providing instruction and monitoring progress across the reopening models. And finally, collaboration to support inclusive access across the reopening models, including supports that might be needed by staff and also with our families. In terms of our focus for today, we're going to start with some framing and considerations for documenting specially designed instruction and least restrictive environment across reopening models in early childhood settings. Then Ryan is going to transition us to a deeper discussion of the early childhood special education case study, and then also some special considerations for supporting young children and families. We'll close today's webinar with strategies and resources to support instructional strategies and progress monitoring for early childhood. So with that, let's get started. During the first webinar of this series, we started with an overview of LRE and SDI across school reopening models. And so we'll do just a quick review. IEPs have to include the frequency, location, and duration of services. When we talk about location or setting, we're referring only to whether a setting is special education or general education, not whether that instruction is provided online, in person, live in the moment, right, synchronous or asynchronous. We've been receiving a lot of questions about whether the IEP needs to document the reopening model. And the way that we think about this is that's important information for all students and families to have, including families of students with disabilities. It is not, however, information that's required to be on the IEP service matrix. The IEP has to document the offer of a free and appropriate public education. And in many cases, the IEP can be implemented as written across reopening models. There may be situations where an IEP amendment is not required when the student is moving from in-person services to hybrid learning or to distance learning. As always, local decisions about when and if to document IEP changes should be discussed with your district leadership. So thinking about settings across reopening models. These considerations are based on guidance from the IDEA Data Center and the original resources linked at the bottom of this slide. I want to take a moment to walk us through a few key points. Most importantly, when we're calculating LRE, remember that setting is based solely on the level of access to the student's peer group. It's not determined by the instructor, nor the content, nor the method of delivery. In situations where all students in a district or all students in a building are participating in distance learning, the student's home becomes the setting from which all students are accessing their instruction. Because of this, in this situation, the student's home would typically be considered a general education setting. Whether those services are distance or in person, synchronous or asynchronous, at home, in a developmental preschool classroom, or in a community-based early childhood setting, just ask yourself, what is the level of access to the peer group during this instruction, service, or activity? The answer to that will determine the setting. And related to that point, we wanted to think through a scenario specific to early childhood. When children with disabilities are placed in a developmental preschool program, their peers are typically primarily other students with disabilities. In that situation, asynchronous activities, although for many students that would typically be considered a general education setting, in this case, asynchronous activities in the home might be considered a special education setting. We're going to talk through a few examples. So this would be a really good time to think through, does this make sense for some of the contexts that you're teaching in, and if you have some questions. So here's a few examples we're going to walk through. Synchronous means occurring at the same time, and asynchronous means not occurring at the same time. Remember that SDI and LRE are not impacted by whether the learning is synchronous or asynchronous, nor whether the services are provided in person or through distance learning. Specially designed instruction can be provided in a general education setting or a special education setting and can include all of these different delivery models. The table that we have here shows a few examples for how we can think about setting or location across early childhood reopening models. The key factor is whether the participating peer group includes only or primarily students with disabilities. So I want to just take a moment here to pause. I see that we have a question in the Q&A, and then I want to give the group a moment to look through some of these and see what wonderings or questions are coming up for you. Raquel asked in the Q&A how to access the recordings. So we only have the first of the series posted so far, and it's on our OSPI webpage under the monthly updates. There's a section for monthly webinars, and we have both the recording and the slides posted there. I can't pull up the link myself right now, but maybe one of my team members can, or I can pull it up a little bit later today, and I'll get that posted for you. So Ryan, before I move on from this slide, I'm wondering if there's a certain example in here that you'd like us to talk about before we switch to the next topic.
Well, I'm thinking through that, and I would say, definitely looking at the special education. So we'll talk about different settings that our students with disabilities might be in as preschool students, and it really will, it gets a little complicated, or let's say unique when we're working in our early childhood programs. And I think just what you spoke to on the previous slide is probably going to be where our teams will want to have some deeper considerations about setting when it comes to asynchronous. And when we're working with students with disabilities, what would your asynchronous be? I would say as we walk through this myself, that was probably where I was most challenged, is just because we have such a diverse makeup of delivery models in Washington State. There's a lot of flexibility here and an opportunity for either maintaining or creating inclusionary environments or opportunities for students with disabilities that we may not be considering. So I think we'll walk through that and have more opportunity to see how that's possible when Rebecca steps in.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks, Ryan. Becky asked a question about whether asynchronous would be a student watching a Zoom recording that they were unable to attend in person. I think that's a perfect example. So I had pulled the link to one of the read-alongs that's available on PBS Kids. If a teacher is recording a live lesson and that student or the family needs to access that at a different time because of childcare needs or just not being able to sit with the child at that time, having the ability for them to watch that later absolutely can count for their specially designed instruction. It would be asynchronous. And so that's a great question. Thanks for sharing that. I'll keep us moving to make sure that you have enough time to think through today's case study. I definitely encourage you to keep thinking through questions and post them anytime. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan for our case study.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. And thank you, Tanya, for setting the stage. So now we're going to spend some time talking about our preschool case study. So very excited to have this opportunity to walk this through with you all. We'll be looking at Avery. So the case is Avery. Avery is dear to my heart. This is someone that I would say has been an inspiration and a guide. So this is not true to form, but this is partially nonfiction. We're looking at Avery, and we want to look at how the IEP team can maintain developmentally appropriate practices across models, and that's something in early childhood that we speak to often and plenty of times is what we desire is developmentally appropriate practices, and I know that's been one of the bigger conversations in our networks has been how do we maintain this in such a varied state that we have right now. So what we'll do is look at how we can maintain developmentally appropriate practices across all learning models while including families and implementation processes. So family engagement, incredibly important as well as we move forward. We'll be reviewing special considerations for IEP teams and what they might take to create a specialized learning environment and plan for students participating in early childhood special education programs, and share examples, daily schedules, instructional strategies, and more to promote just a positive learning experience for our students as we move forward. Can you advance? Thank you. So Avery is coming to us from an early intervention program. She was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at 13 months of age, and after being referred to her local school district for continued services, was found to be eligible for Part B IDEA. So after reviewing current data with Avery from her intervention, her early intervention provider agency, her EIPA, also with parent report and assessment gathered by her school district's assessment team, it was determined by her IEP team that the most appropriate placement for Avery at this time was going to be with their school district's developmental preschool program. Currently, that preschool program does enroll students with and without disabilities. Their current ratio is 8 students with disabilities to 4 students without disabilities, which means that by definition, it doesn't mean the OSIP defined regular early childhood program for reporting criteria, but it is offering access to students without disabilities. Okay, next slide. There we go. Avery's local community has experienced an outbreak of COVID-19 in recent months, and in planning and preparation have identified multiple operational models for the start of the 2021 school year. Her IEP has been amended to plan for FAPE across the reopening models, and the IEP team has adopted several strategies that we want to review today to ensure that developmentally appropriate practices will be offered across all settings. Next slide. So strategies that were identified by Avery's IEP team include identifying goals that were important to the family. We want to involve Avery's family in scheduling decisions and establishing predictable routines and a schedule for disseminating the information to those families. We also want to use state early childhood guides and guidelines to discuss what children of similar age are doing and how they're learning. And the IEP team has also determined that it would be necessary to engage Avery's family or to find a way to engage Avery's family in collecting the evidence, such as work samples, videos, and photographs of her progress towards those learning goals that they've identified. This is a suggestion. It was identified as an area that Avery's family could lift, but we do want to be cautious not to put pressure on or suggest that families have to be that person and offer that contribution, because we know not every family is the same and not every family has capacity to stand in this role. So this is a case-by-case situation that we want to be sensitive to. Next slide. All right. So additional suggestions by the IEP team would be scaffolding the length of the session to support the needs of Avery and her family. Suggestion for this might be that if a student is participating or this child is participating in a 20-minute occupational therapy session, that 10 minutes of that session would start with parent orientation with the student, followed by observation of student and family. Another suggestion was that we would review and that we would look at Avery's family home environment, and that the team would help Avery make recommendations around environmental setup to identify what might be too stimulating, what tools would be need to be readily available to make the learning experience more productive or positive, and also how they might utilize adult proximity to support the learning experience. Next slide. Okay. So at the start of the 2021 school year, Avery's classroom teachers shared a proposed schedule that captured both hybrid and distance learning for their families. It was decided by the Early Childhood Special Education Program team that students would engage in distance learning for no more than 90 minutes, that sessions would be capped at 20 minutes at a time with no more than 3 meetups in a day. Students would engage in either small or larger group instruction with their peers, and that the time would be set aside for both delivery and monitoring of student progress, one-to-one instruction for specialists, your OT, SOP, PT, whomever that might be, and also opportunity for brain breaks. So thinking ahead, what might be needed and necessary to make this experience work. The classroom teachers also identified additional engagement strategies to ensure that the delivery of instruction was developmentally appropriate. You'll see that on the slide. Some of the engagement tips included offering rapid transitions. We have little, so we know that we have to move forward quickly and make sure that we are exciting, engaging, and we do this in a quick and intentional manner. We're going to use breakout rooms, so use your technology to maintain engagement, have short chunking of tasks, 5 minutes offline, 10 minutes online, have a little variation in that delivery of services, those brain breaks that include and involve physical movement. We know we need them. We need them, and we know our kids need them to wake up the brain. And then increased opportunities for student engagement. Sit and get is not how our babies learn, and we want to be very aware of that, so offer that variety. Moving forward. Great. Okay, so Avery is starting her second year in a developmental preschool program, and her district has chosen to begin this school year with distance learning, is planning ahead, and they are preparing for hybrid instruction. Her annual IEP was developed before COVID hit. It was created back in January 2020, right before all this went down, and it includes cognition, communication, adaptive skill development, social emotional learning, and occupational therapy. As distance learning persists, the IEP team is working to create a high-quality early learning program that supports Avery's ability to engage in distance learning at home. Next. Avery's IEP team has worked very hard to maintain strong connections with Avery and her family, with weekly check-ins that are centered on Avery, her progress towards her IEP goals, and the integration of service delivery into the family's daily routines. So looking at her present levels, you'll see that it was reported by Avery's family in the spring that she did enjoy and was able to engage in her online and offline learning tasks, but that she needed constant supervision and was having difficulty with attention and engagement. Identified priorities by the IEP team include maintaining those regular check-ins with Avery's family to assist the IEP team in assessing the progress of Avery's towards her goals, as well as facilitation of adult training or parent training to ensure better understanding of how to engage Avery in learning tasks in the home environment. So that is something that might be new within that early childhood special education realm. It is very familiar to those of you that are engaged in 0 to 2, we call early intervention part C, is maintaining and building a relationship with family as that coach and first teacher. Okay, next. I think you got to click. Yeah, click away there, Tanya. Avery started with distance learning format. We said that before, and we'll transition to in-person. So this is just a little preview of what either or might look like for her. So Avery will participate in distance learning model with her developmental peers, and then that's going to be virtual 2 days a week. And then once she's permitted to move forward into the hybrid in-person model, she'll still maintain some of that distance learning, but she will be on site 2 days a week. Next slide. So for each of the LRE case studies that we have reviewed, and there have been 2 before us for those of you that have not participated in the previous series, the case studies have included considerations and decisions made by the IEP team regarding student services. The case studies examples across reopening models have highlighted service areas and modalities, accommodations, modifications, and parent coaching and progress monitoring. All of those have been encapsulated, so we want to share that with you today. So for this example, what you'll see with Avery is that the goals related to social emotional cognition and adaptive skills will be delivered within an integrated early learning model. That's important to say and to speak to, especially in early childhood, because delivery of the services is different. In this case, again, it's an integrated service delivery model that includes access to high quality core instructional practices and instruction in large and small groups with her same age peers. So when we have our peers, we want to utilize them and make sure that we are engaging in those opportunities as much as possible. Instructional and progress monitoring for communication and for occupational therapy and those related services or other SDI spaces will be following a similar model with specially designed instruction taking place in a one-to-one virtual session with some asynchronous learning with family collaboration. So there's definitely going to be some connection, and it's going to be case by case with our specialists because they have different criteria that they have to follow to maintain the integrity of their instructional experiences. Moving forward. Perfect. And then this is just, again, to touch back on that point of the accommodations, parent support, and progress monitoring. What can that look like? So for Avery, what we are doing is identifying her accommodations, which would include visual, verbal, or physical prompts to increase on-task behaviors with frequent checks for understanding, which is a very preschool accommodation. It makes me smile. Parent supports, what we are going to be working towards is maintaining that biweekly planning session, which pairs really nicely with those 2 days of virtual learning, that you would be using that time to not only check in on child, but also check in with family to assume progress monitoring or just status checks on family. And then down to progress monitoring itself, some types of samples of progress monitoring that we would be gathering would include the IEP goal progress as well as anecdotal notes, work samples, and progress toward adapted online curriculum. A lot of our early childhood programs are using TS Gold, Teaching Strategies Gold, and there's some offshoots of that with Creative Curriculum, Ready Rosie, that have some nice online tools that our sites can access to capture some nice data. Next page. There it is. So this is a really cool example. And what I'll say is that Avery's preschool teacher created choice boards to share with families, bringing the spring. So they did this during spring of our last year's school facility closures. And we'll continue to use the strategy to support synchronous and asynchronous learning in the 2020 school year. What I will say off this case study is just simply, this is a sample that was shared to us by Camas School District, and a huge shout out to Portia, Casey, Kristen, and Erica. Fabulous job. This is amazing. And if you have any questions, you're like, ooh, that's amazing, get a hold of them. Their contact information is right here on this slide, and I would encourage you to reach out. Diane, also, thank you for letting us spotlight this beautiful creation. Next slide. All right, so we know what we can do during distance learning in this increased asynchronous setting. Here's just a quick look at the matrix and what that will look like. So for Avery's case, the total number of weekly minutes for SDI will change due to this, the early childhood program's decision to ensure distance learning was going to be developmentally appropriate. Remembering that they had decided that they were going to cap it at 90 minutes per day, and that they were going to try to keep it at 20 minutes per session. And there's some flex with that depending on need and how that might combine. So with those considerations, again, there will be some revisions. You can see on the slide that there's red marks. So the red text include any callouts for specific information where there has been some changes and where the IEP would need to be amended. This is not going to change her LRE code, just as a side note. So for reporting purposes, it would maintain at what it had prior to the amendment. Next slide. And you can, click away. As Avery transitions to hybrid learning starting in November, the majority of her service will be provided in person, again, 2 days a week. Distance learning will occur 2 days a week. In addition to that, with synchronous and asynchronous learning, 1 day would be virtual online, the other would be, and it could be extended through the rest of the week, asynchronous learning with collaboration of family. So you'll see that in the red text, that's where there's been some changes, but the models stay the same in how that delivery would take place. Still asynchronous and synchronous learning, still collaboration with family, just that addition of in-person services, which would take up the majority of the service time that there was delivery. And you'll see the note at the bottom, there's no amendment needed in this model with hybrid because the service delivery minutes have been met. So the IEP stands as it was in the fall. Okay, moving on.
Ryan, is it now an okay time for me to pause and address a couple Q&As that came in? I think this is a good slide to show that. Thank you. So the first one that came in was where to document in the IEP the team's plan for distance learning. And I think that's such a great question. Just like we started today, you want to start with your district leadership and talk through what your system is deciding in terms of documentation and communication to families. Distance learning in and of itself, if this is the school reopening plan for all kids, that the default is that all students will be learning remotely because of Department of Health recommendations, that doesn't necessarily need to be in the IEP. Remember that what the IEP needs to have are the present levels, the goals, the frequency, location, and duration of services, accommodations, right? It's about the services to the student. So if those are maintained, if there's no change to the minutes, if there's no change in general education or special education setting, you may not need to have an amendment. You may not need to mark that change from distance to hybrid in the IEP. some systems are choosing to document that. Say when you get to hybrid and you're identifying certain students you're going to prioritize for in-person. If they have an IEP, you might decide to document that decision and the data that the team used in a prior written notice. So that could be one way. Again, I would say start with talking with your district leadership, and if you're part of that group, then just talking across content areas around how those types of changes are being communicated to families. And then we had a follow-up question around progress monitoring. So that does need to be in the IEP. How and when, right? So how and how often you will be communicating progress to families does need to be in there. So if as a result of any of these reopening models, there's a change for a student, then that would be something you'd want to document in an IEP or an IEP amendment. And then Carolyn asked, do all IEPs need to be adjusted for minutes, right? Do all IEPs need to be amended if there's a change in minutes? If there's a change in minutes ever, yeah. It's the anticipated frequency, location, and duration of services. So there is nothing in the regulations that has, what percentage of change it is. It's just, it should be the documentation of the free and appropriate public education. So whatever that offer of FAPE is, needs to be included in that IEP and needs to reflect the current level of services. So great questions. All right, Ryan, I will turn it back over to you and I'll keep an eye on the Q&A.
Well, this is where I say, let's stop and ask some questions. So that was perfect timing. And then what I will now say is, and then I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca. So Dr. Rebecca Lynn is going to take care of us now, and she's going to walk us through how we can create inclusive, developmentally appropriate and learning experience across our settings for all of our students with disabilities in these amazingly diverse programs. So thank you, Tanya, for your amazing knowledge there. And Rebecca, you're on.
All right, next slide. Thank you so much. Okay, continuous distance learning in early childhood special education. Just a few points I want to make on this. The first being that families are essential partners for continued learning in an early childhood distance or hybrid model. And service providers may be communicating and collaborating more than ever with families to provide guidance and coaching that's needed to teach and maintain IEP goals at home, but also to help families use best practices for teaching young children. So families need models for following through with intervention in the home within everyday routines. Guidance and modeling can be provided online or in pre-recorded videos, or a variety of other ways. And its transdisciplinary approach can really help streamline service provision to minimize the consultation load on families. It requires some advanced collaboration and planning by the team, but it can really help to minimize, offload what families, so they're not inundated by multiple different people. And then it's important to acknowledge that this is a stressful time for families and children. And we really want to be careful to make tasks doable for the family. And instructional plans can be modeled, but should also be written and emailed to include goals, materials, and steps for modeling skills and for facilitating the learning for young children. Access to peers can be facilitated by the family online and in the community with the help of the service providers. They are at home alone or with maybe siblings, but there are other things that we can do to get creative. There's a few suggestions here. Providers can help families connect with preschools that offer online or in-person activities. Help create structured online playtime with peers, and maybe considering exploring pre-selected YouTube videos of children playing and learning, and watch with the child using strategies for shared observation and promoting language and learning to learn from what they're observing on the videos. Another example, I mean, if you can, you can look through YouTube videos as in pre-select uploaded videos of young children collecting leaves or interacting with each other, and the video could be paused and the volume off, and comments could be made, and all of this can be facilitated by the parents with some coaching by the specialist to look at the interactions between the children and to describe the actions. And another option would be to look at like PBS Kids, like Tanya mentioned earlier, or another early childhood show. But what would be best practice would be to watch the show with the child with some intentional intervention, some questions, some modeling, some pausing, some interpretation of what's happening, and highlighting some communication exchanges and other behaviors. So it's not passive, it's more of an active time, and that could be considered really great experience for young children watching peers. Next slide. So another suggestion is to consider home-based intervention matrices. This is a matrix for charting home routines, can be useful to see where IEP intervention and practice on goals can be embedded in home routines. This matrix was this is not. The embedded home-based intervention is something that Head Start promotes, and it's usually developed in the preschool setting, but it can also be implemented in the home and completed in collaboration with the family using the questions that are listed here in conjunction with parent-centered lessons and activity plans. So considering, this is just maybe a snapshot of waking up, going to breakfast, and then some learning time, and what goals, what activities, what interventions might be embedded at different times of the day, and looking at typical activities and routines and transitions that occur each day, what learning opportunities there are across typical activities, what goals could the family target, what's reasonable, what can they see, what do they imagine being able to implement, and is it natural and logical at that time to teach, and the number of opportunities throughout the day that the child can practice. Next slide. So this is an image or a visual of ECSE monitoring or embedded learning, that families are essential partners in the monitoring of progress on goals at home in the distance learning model. And we want them to capture data in, between online visits or between coaching and modeling, between time with specialists, and facilitating changes in instruction. So in this way, families are partners in fostering continuous growth and improvement. And this diagram was developed by the Head Start Center for Inclusion on Embedded Intervention. And it's a pretty easy diagram to follow for families, and can really help structure the data collection. So 1, 2, 3, asking, what am I doing? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Or is the intervention embedded like it's, like we intend for it to be embedded? And am I using the right instructional strategies and sequencing? And then 2, is it working? So you're collecting the data on how the intervention is provided, or how the practice is provided, and how the child is responding. And then 3, do we need to make changes? So this is a collaborative process for service providers and families for progress monitoring. Next slide. So a little bit more about progress monitoring. There are many resources that can be used for collecting and reviewing data, even with distance learning. So, quantitative data is the process of counting numbers or number of times a behavior or response is observed, the frequency of a response, or the time engaged in an activity. And qualitative data is a narrative that describes details not easily captured in that quantitative data method. And so a combination is really best. This worksheet here that's displayed shows a combination. At the top, there's more quantitative data collection, and then at the bottom, there's an opportunity to make anecdotal notes, qualitative notes. And it can be, data sources can be parent report, videos, photos. So here's a photo of a child doing a project that could go in his folder or be an example of for data collection. And so data is all around, of course, and observations on overall development are important in early childhood special education. But progress monitoring pays specific attention to data that corresponds to an IEP goal. So at the very least, data should be collected about the amount and types of SDI provided, as well as the child responses and the learning outcomes, so that a cycle of progress monitoring includes identifying the IEP goals and objectives to work on and monitor, and exploring appropriate systems and templates for data collection, modeling how to use data systems with families, and reviewing frequently to make instructional changes. So a note at the bottom, during the COVID, whatever data gathered during the spring of 2020 can be used to document status on goals, plan interventions, and monitor going forward. So next slide. So this is just some considerations for online learning for students with disabilities that I think are relevant for all ages. And really, these are things that we as providers need to take into consideration. And it's kind of a checklist for educators when delivering a distance learning model and when reviewing and evaluating that model, which we should be doing on an ongoing basis. But considering equity and orientation to the tools to ensure instruction. Do parents, checking early on if they have the tools and equipment that's needed in order to engage in the service delivery as it's intended? And do they understand how to use them? Do they need help, technical support? And then ensuring that students and parents have the resources and the skills to participate. Reciprocal communication with the families is essential. The best way to share plans and schedules and to learn what works for them. And then predictable routines are good for everyone to maintain a flow of instruction and activities that can fall on a regular basis can really help reduce stress for students, for children and parents. Learning and assessment plans should be flexible so the content and format can be modified for individual students. And then parent training and coaching is essential. We talked a little bit about that for continuous learning. And finally, specialists, early childhood providers can collaborate with general education preschool teachers and as partners and to continue to stay connected with early childhood goals, with curriculum and opportunities, but also to streamline services and create access to learning for alongside peers. And then the next slide. This is some really great distance learning resources that I encourage everyone to explore. The first one, so they're extremely helpful for educators and families. The first one is the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center resource. And it has resources for educators, related service providers on improving systems, practices, and outcomes in distance learning for young children with disabilities. So all of these are really, most of them are specific for distance learning for early childhood The Division for Early Childhood DEC resources are EI and ECSE resources for providers that support young children, parents, and young children. I said young children twice, to be used during distance learning, to include blogs and stories for children, but also resources on behavior and parenting. Developmentally appropriate practice is another resource that has information on early learning standards. The DAISY is through the Center for IDEA and has technical assistance that supports the principles of relationships, flexibility, responsiveness to the needs of young children with disabilities. And the Head Start Center for Inclusion is a great resource with videos and handouts on embedded learning for preschool that can be adapted for distance learning in the home. But it also has training modules and videos for children and parents that you might find interesting. And the last one is the Early Childhood Recommended Practices modules that really has wonderful examples of lesson plans in early childhood that could be modified for families. And it's really wonderful to provide really concrete directions to families on what the goal is, what the materials that are needed to work on that goal, what are some strategies for setting it up, for approaching the child, for time frame, how long to do it, what to expect, and how to embed practice. So all of these principles of curriculum design and pedagogy can be simplified for families to be able to follow through on activities at home. And then the next slide is just some additional resources on ECSE program team resources. So this is, next slide is questions.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I'll move forward. Before we kind of move to our final questions, we had somebody let me know, thanks Becky, that some of the links might not be working in the Google slide deck. So when we get done today, I'll go check that and make sure. Also, I want to just communicate, we will post the original PowerPoint file when we post the recording. So you'll have access to that. We always like to share the original slides in case you would like to download them, use them in your own trainings, share them with colleagues and staff. So you'll have access to that. And I double checked that those are all working right now in the current PowerPoint. As I talk through this webinar series and some of our future plans, I just want to share that's the end of our content for today. So what we have for the next couple of minutes is just to close out our conversation today, any final considerations, and really to make sure that we are answering your questions. So if there was something that you had hoped we would talk through today that we haven't touched on yet, now's a great time to raise that, because if you have the question, you can be sure that many people have the same question. So any topic right now would be totally open for whatever's on your mind. So to talk through this series, we did this series in a three-part session. So we started on September 16th, we talked through an elementary example, and then also talked about a middle school and behavior case. The recording and slides for those are already posted and they're linked here. Then we transitioned to talk a little bit about secondary transition for a student who is over 18. And we should get that one posted this week. And then today we're closing out the LRE series talking through our early childhood case study. And the other thing I wanted to make sure, for those of you who might have joined us a little bit later today, the revised version of the LRE case study that just posted, I believe this morning or late last night, not only has the early childhood case study, but it also has an appendix at the end with some frequently asked questions. So a lot of the questions that came up today are addressed in some way or another in that FAQ. And as we continue to get questions about the resource, we'll periodically update that appendix to add those additional questions. Now that we've finished this weekly series, from starting into October, we're going to shift to a monthly format. And we still want to really encourage our IEP case managers to join us for these. That's really the audience that we're thinking through. Of course, leadership as well. IEP team members and families are also welcome to join. We're really trying to narrow in, though, our lens on what do our IEP case managers and special educators and providers need to think through. So we're going to have the second Thursday of every month at 3 o'clock, we'll do a recurring webinar. And so in October 8th, we're going to talk about inclusionary practices across our reopening models. We're going to be joined by Dr. Kathy Martin from the University of Washington, and also some of our educators from the Toppenish School District. On November 12th, we're going to be focusing on progress monitoring and collaboration, and really trying to think through. At that point, we expect more of our systems will have transitioned to a hybrid model. Some of you might already be in that situation. So we'll try to make sure that we're bringing in some of the latest resources to support that shift. And then in December, really maintaining and leveraging those family and community partnerships. And so we hope to include some of our partners in that work so that we can make sure that we're centering that voice. And the registration links are all set up for those, so they're there. We do ask that people register for those individually because there might or might not be a topic when you're interested or available to join. Becky asked whether slides were added after we registered. I don't think so, but certainly happy to connect with you, Becky, over email if there's a question or a resource that you need that you're not able to access. And so as Rebecca kind of set us up, we're just available for the next couple of minutes if there are some questions that you have or any wonderings. Ryan, if there's any kind of hot topics that are still on your mind, we could close with those reminders or calling out any resources too.
I would, and this is Ryan, if you are like, where is she? This is Ryan one more time. And I say right now, what is most important is really considering how to include our students with disabilities in the variety of settings that we have and how we can maintain inclusionary practices and support. So I hope I was going to say, I hope everyone can hear me because it felt like it was a freezing moment. So I love internet. But yeah, no, just do what you can. If you have questions and need to brainstorm, please reach out. But ECTA is your stand connection site for anything to do with Part C and Part B for students 0 to 5. And again, we are always here for you. So if you have any questions, please reach out. And do know that when you ask those questions, we capture them and then we will include that in, and typically are including that in either our Q&A standing document around COVID or in this document as well. I'm sure we would imagine expanding this as well. So ask the questions because you're not alone. And in early childhood special education specifically, it tends to be a little bit quieter. We need to be, bring our questions and concerns to the forefront so that we can support our students and families. But I just want to thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information and to help continue to build our programs.
Absolutely. And I just want to second that. At the end of each of these webinars, people have been really great about reaching out to us. If there's a question that occurs to you later, or as you're looking through the case study or some of the FAQs, and it just something just doesn't make sense to you from your lens, please let us know. There have been situations where we were able to kind of revise some of our answers and our thinking because of the feedback from the field. This is a new world for all of us. And so we certainly want to make sure that we're considering all perspectives as we're trying to put out and develop some guidance that, in some cases hasn't been done before. So we really, really appreciate your partnership in that work. There's one final question that I'm seeing, and it just to clarify a little bit more, right? Exactly when would an IEP amendment need to be done? And that's going to be a really hard question to answer in way down into the weeds, right? Because again, what I would say is you really want to talk through your district leadership or talk to your district leadership and make sure that you're following those local guidelines. What I can say from a very, high level, from the regulations and rules perspective, is if you are making a change to the offer of a free and appropriate public education, if there's a change to the services, the service areas, or a change in the frequency, location, and duration of those areas, that would be kind of your number one way to cue you that you're going to probably need to make a change to the amendment. A change to the IEP, excuse me. Not simply because you went from services in the school classroom to distance learning. If you have a student who, maybe you have a younger child who's doing itinerant services, right? So they may not have already been, they're not in a developmental preschool, and they were dropping in for their speech services. If you can maintain the minutes and the setting in this distance format, and you're doing a Zoom once a week, then that would be an example of where you may not need to do an amendment because the services, there isn't a change to the student services. So I hope that helps. When there's a very specific case, something you're really thinking about and wondering about, we really would encourage you to reach out to us. Email Ryan or email the special education office, and we will get back to you with as detailed an answer as we can. So with that, I think we're just about at time. As always, I can't imagine how many other tasks and Zoom meetings everyone has been involved in throughout the day, and for you to come and take the time to spend some minutes with us in the afternoon is greatly appreciated. I hope that this was helpful. I really want to thank Ryan and Rebecca for sharing such amazing information today. Thank you for that. And we hope that you'll join us for our monthly series starting in October. So thank you everyone.
Thank you.